Hi, I'm Dr. Keshishian, and welcome to our podcast series, PPE, Podcast for Psychoeducation During the COVID-19 Pandemic. Today, I'm joined by Ms. Selin Nazarians, administrator within our public school system in Los Angeles County, and Dr. Emily Edlynn, a child psychologist who has been featured in resources like Parents Magazine, Good Housekeeping, and HuffPost. She also has a parenting blog, The Art and Science of Mom, which can be found at emilyedlynphd.com. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Hi.
It's so nice to have the both of you. Today, we're going to discuss a few different things, such as what is this new normal for schools? How are teachers, administrators, parents, and children adjusting to this new way of operating? And how can parents help their children to best learn and thrive during this time? So, Ms. Nazarians, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? How did you get involved in education?
So I'm actually starting my 14th year in education. I was one of those kids growing up. I knew I wanted to be a teacher. I looked up to my teachers. And that was, I think I was maybe one of very few kids in college who knew what I wanted to do. I'd never changed majors or anything like that. And so it just took a little turn where I was thinking that I'd go into general education and teach elementary school, and I ended up teaching in special education, still at the elementary level, but I have experience in preschool. I have most of my experiences in elementary. I have very a short year and a half in high school, but I have worked at non-public schools, and I've worked at the public schools as well, and I'm in my 7th year as an administrator.
Wow, that's really impressive. Thank you. Dr. Edlynn, how did you get involved in child psychology?
That's so funny. We kind of share this passion since I figured out at age 10 that I wanted to be a child psychologist. I always loved kids, even as a kid myself, and kind of gravitated towards those kids that just seemed to need a little extra attention, a little extra comfort. And so I, powered through the whole pathway of getting the PhD in clinical psychology. Graduated in 2007, became licensed in 2008, and my first job was at Children's Hospital Los Angeles. So I have some LA blood in me, and so I worked there, and then I worked at Children's Hospital Colorado, and now I am in Oak Park, just outside Chicago, doing private practice work. And my specialty is working with children and adolescents and, of course, families.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's obvious you both are very qualified for this discussion. So let's, get right to it. Ms. Nazarians, can you tell us a little bit about what the last few months have been looking like for the school systems?
It's busy. A lot of planning, a lot of prepping, only to have some new information released, and it's like, okay, back to the drawing board, start over. So it's been, since schools went in, and here in California and in Los Angeles, we went into quarantine in March. It was almost like building the plane as you're flying it, because teachers didn't know what to expect. It was like, oh, maybe we'll be gone for 2 or 3 weeks. And then we just kept hearing, no, we're going to go to April. Oh no, to May. Oh no, we're finishing off the school year. But maybe we'll be back in August. And then came July, and we were like, yeah, we're not going back. And so it's been a lot of planning and prepping. Teachers have been doing a lot of professional development just to learn a lot of the platforms and tools that they're going to need to make sure that students are engaged, that students are learning. I know certain districts during the last school year, or the spring semester, they were very lenient with attendance. They were very lenient with, grading assignments and things like that, and having assignments turned in. Whereas now we're starting the school year, we have a plan in place. School boards have agreed and voted on certain things to have in place in terms of like schedules and things like that, where students are being held accountable now for attendance. Students are being held accountable for their work that's being turned in. And so, but again, it changes. But for now, for now, I think we've got the skeleton done, and the school I'm at, next week will be our second week of school. And so we're taking the time, especially in these first few weeks, to really get to know the kids, because we want to know where they're coming from. Social emotional needs are being met before we can start with the academics and making sure that the academic needs are being met.
That makes a lot of sense. It seems like there's been a moving target since March, and we're trying to our best to kind of stabilize, and then it gets moved around a little bit. Dr. Edlynn, what have you seen among the parents and the children and the families that you work with since the start of the pandemic and now as they prepare for the school year, especially as it relates to their education?
Right. I mean, there have been so many phases of coping with all of this and resetting daily living, um, especially in the midst of so much uncertainty. And what I've seen is, of course, at the tip of the iceberg is the anxiety about academic losses in kids of all ages. And what is that going to mean for their development, their future, feeling anxious about the spring not being as much teaching as review of material. And then that's transitioning into the anxiety in the fall about what is going to be different. And I think bigger than that, however, is that this sadness around this huge loss of the entire experience of being in school.
Right.
I mean, this is our children's jobs, is to go to school every day. And they are developing on every level because of school, cognitively, socially. So it's a huge loss that parents, I think, are very worried about and kind of astute to their kids' behaviors and emotions at home. I do think there's also I want to, really mention the specialized needs of certain students, with IEPs and learning struggles, and how much parents are feeling like this is impossible, and being very concerned about their children who need even more specialized educator training by their side. What is that going to mean, for their child's well-being?
Absolutely. I think you bring up a lot of good points, especially for children who have IEPs and need IEPs. Ms. Nazarians, do you think that you can expand a little bit as an administrator what this new educational structure looks like in different areas?
Of course. So I know a lot of schools have put together, because in March when we went out, like I said, it was nobody really knew what to expect. Kids didn't, parents didn't, teachers didn't. And so a lot of concern towards the end of the school year was, a lot of that face-to-face contact with teachers, making sure that the child still stayed connected to the teacher, still connected to school. And so this time around, since we're starting the school year off and we've had the summer to prep and prepare, I do know that a lot of districts have in place set schedules, and what they've done is they have like synchronous time, asynchronous time in between, and they're able to meet the children's needs. That way, parents have now something that they can go off of, where it was in March, it was like, well, we're not quite sure what's going to happen in a month, so we can't give you a schedule for what's going to happen in a month. Whereas now it's okay, we know that for now, for the next few months, at least for this first semester, we're still here in distance learning. This is what the schedule is going to look like. Children with IEPs, I know during the spring, like if they received any specialized services besides academics, like if they received speech services, OT services, PT services, it was a lot of Zooming with the parent, and parent having to do what the PT is doing or what the OT is doing. Speech was a little bit better because you were able to still have the child produce the sounds and things like that. But PT and OT was very difficult. And then your most needy kids, they suffered because they weren't getting all the services that they needed to the full extent possible. I know in the district I work for, children receive services. However, I do know that districts in general were having a hard time making sure that, if the IEP stated, 150 minutes of specialized academic services in the area of math, for that child to receive those services. So things should be better this time around, because like I said, we're kind of like, okay, been there, done that. Changes have been made, things have been modified. And so now educators and administrators are better prepared to teach children. And I think children also kind of know what to expect now. Something we came across at the school I work at is in the beginning, Zoom was such a novelty that kids were really engaged, really enjoyed it. But by the end of the school year, it was, please turn your camera on. I need you to make sure you're logged in. And, so that novelty wore off. And you also had some teachers who did Zoom sessions and some who used Google Classroom and they just posted assignments. And so you would have a household with 2 children in 2 different classrooms where one teacher felt comfortable doing Zoom lessons, whereas the other one didn't. And so it was like, oh, how come you get to see your teacher and I don't? And I think, listening to parent concerns about things like that, listening to teachers about what worked and what didn't, and creating a plan for this fall has really helped.
I really appreciate what you said about our students with intellectual disabilities or any sort of developmental disabilities. In my own psychiatric practice, what I've found is that the structure that they needed to do well was lost, and it was like a quick takeaway. And so things decompensated very quickly. Mm-hmm. And I think what you touched upon was we've had time to prepare. We've learned a few things along the way. We've figured out things that work and figured out things that don't work, and we've adjusted, and we've had the summer essentially to prepare what the academic year would look like. So that's very reassuring. Can you explain a little bit more about what distance learning is?
Yeah, so what distance learning is students who are not in a classroom with their teacher. They're on a technology device, whether it's a Chromebook or a laptop or a computer, and they use a Zoom platform or a Google Classroom platform or Seesaw, and they connect with the teacher and peers. That way, teachers will teach a lesson, and they can say, okay, here's the math lesson for today. They do the instruction, making sure, okay, give me a thumbs up if you understood, thumbs down if you need help. And then they might do something like where, I noticed little Johnny and little Susie having a hard time with this last lesson. Why don't you guys hang out? Everyone else, why don't you sign out, go complete this assignment, and then I'll connect back. We're going to log back in 30 minutes. And then those who were struggling, teacher keeps them behind for a little bit longer, reviews. So similar to what would happen in a classroom, except that it's all done virtually. Something I know teachers have, and parents also have said is, in a classroom, if you have a question, you raise your hand and, Miss So-and-so, can you help me with number 5? Whereas if you've logged off now, it's like, I did 1, 2, 3, and 4. Oh, wait, I'm stuck on number 5. I need help, And so the struggle comes in where if parents are working from home, they're on their own, they're doing their Zoom sessions and their phone calls. So it's like, who's going to help me answer this question? So that comes into play. But distance learning really is just a learning virtually.
Dr. Edlynn, can you tell us from a psychological perspective about this distance learning? What should parents know about the differences between attending school under this new structure or setting up this home-based schooling?
So I think there are different ways to think about it. On a very practical, pragmatic level, one huge difference, if you just think about the experience of kids at school versus home, is at school, they're moving. There are a lot of natural breaks in the learning throughout the day. Even if it's a couple minutes in transition between subjects, they're kind of chit-chatting with friends. There's just a lot of this kind of other activity happening in between learning. So that feels very different, right, than sitting in front of a device, being on Zoom or clicking on links, being on apps. And it's really tough for their attention span. So I think, being realistic as parents, we're at work, we're sitting in front of the computer, we do our job for a few hours. Right. And I think, I struggled with my youngest was a kindergartner in the spring, and he wanted to stand on his head while he was doing his learning. And I'm like, can you just sit and do it? So I just think it's remembering just how different the physical experience is too. And in terms of, setting ourselves up now that we know this is happening, rather than reacting to this abrupt change, knowing that they need these movement breaks and brain breaks and kind of figuring out how to build those in. And so obviously younger kids will need them more often versus older kids, but even older kids really need them too, from looking at a screen, from thinking. So making sure those are built into the day. and that kids are doing that for their own well-being. I also think another huge consideration in terms of the difference is that there's really no way to replicate kind of that natural peer-to-peer interaction that happens in the classroom. How much those interactions facilitate learning, beyond what the teacher's instructing, and that has been a struggle with the remote learning or distance learning structure, is that they just don't have that sort of role modeling from a peer to peer, helping each other and all that they gain from those interactions. So I think along those lines, it's being with our kids about how to find social opportunities that fit their personalities, their capabilities, their age, their development, what makes sense, but really prioritizing those social interactions any way we can.
Do you have any suggestions or tips for parents of how to maximize on those social opportunities?
I mean, I think it's important to examine, okay, my family's comfort level with risk in terms of play, especially with the younger kids, and to really openly communicate about that with other parents. I think we've kind of gotten into a little bit of a mask shaming, parent shaming culture where everyone has different thresholds for how they want to approach this. And I think it's just, and I've done this in our own social circles and in our community. It's about, this is what I'm comfortable with. What would work for you? Playing outside in a park with masks on feels comfortable to me, and to other parents that I've talked to, but we have to have that conversation. And I think sometimes we get so concerned that we're not communicating. And so I think it's kind of just putting it out there and doing our best to find those opportunities for our kids.
So it sounds like communication with the kids and the parents and the other children, right? Keeping an open dialogue and figuring out what makes sense and what's safe.
Yes, so that everyone's comfortable, but not missing out.
Right.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of media coverage, a lot talking about the teachers' reactions to schools reopening. Ms. Nazarians, do you have any thoughts?
I think it's really hard because as a teacher, if schools were to open and you have underlying health issues, you're putting yourself at risk. Even if you don't have underlying issues, if you're in a classroom of 20 kids, or even a half of that, even if it was 10 kids in a classroom, 12 kids in a classroom wearing masks, there's still that chance of exposure. And something to think about is if I'm in a classroom with 10 kids and I'm exposed and I come home and now my family's exposed, and if my children are attending another school and now they're exposed, so it's like this domino or ripple effect, which I believe why a lot of teachers were against opening schools, and not necessarily, it's not don't ever open schools, but for now, because especially at the time, over the past month and a half in California or in LA County, especially, we went back onto like a second wave of quarantine. Numbers were going back up, and so they, it was like, so we're going to open now when the CDC is reporting that it's actually worse now than it was in March. Mm-hmm. And so it's that safety piece of, knowing that, or if example, you have a household where you have a husband and wife team, both educators working at two different schools, you're now affecting two different schools, two different sets of classrooms. And then if those kids have siblings in those schools, you're now, so again, that domino effect just takes off. There were teachers who were comfortable with coming back, but I think it becomes a major liability issue is, you can't guarantee the safety of the students, the staff, teachers, and opening up schools isn't just opening a classroom with the teacher. You need janitors, you need a school nurse, you need, then what do you do about recess play? Because if we're not sharing equipment, how do you do recess? And if you have 7 classes on campus, 8, 9, 10 classes on campus, how do you alternate their schedules? And so I just think safety was a priority for educators when it came to opening schools.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And I think we've talked about the teacher perspective of things. We've talked about kind of what the struggles are that administrations had to work through. What about the parents? Have they expressed any sort of specific concerns that to you, to administration, to the schools?
I know, we have, school boards now do their school board meetings via Zoom, or via other platforms that are, virtual. And I know families who participate, they have like the Q&A section, or families get to voice their concern or their opinion and things like that, prior to school boards voting to what the fall would look like, just throughout Southern California. And you get both, you get families who think schools should open with masks and everything will be fine. And you get parents who want that because they work and so they rely on school for childcare. You get families who want the schools to open, not necessarily for the academics, but more for the social emotional piece, to make sure that, those needs are being met, because it's hard to make those needs met at home. Then you get families who think schools should not open because it's a safety concern, because it's a health concern. And so you get both sides. And I think it just, obviously here in Southern California, I would say a lot of school districts have gone remote and have done the distance learning just because of that safety factor.
Right. Dr. Edlynn, how about yourself? Have you heard any specific concerns from parents or families?
Well, I think child health and safety really is the number one concern of parents. It's just there can be different priorities of what that means. What is health and safety for their kids? And some of them feel like their kids are safer at school in certain ways, especially if there are parents who do not have childcare resources and are working outside the home. It feels like such an impossible situation. And I think that a lot of times, and just social media and how everything is really heated and people are really on edge right now in general, that I think what can get lost is a lot of common concerns, that we're all scared, we're all worried, and we just have different like immediate threats, and that's where we're focused for our family's safety. I think parents are concerned teacher safety. I mean, it's very real, what we were talking about with teachers exposure and what that means. And here in Illinois, it's been a very interesting progression of a plan to do full in-person a few weeks ago has really suddenly shifted to 100% remote in several school districts. So a lot of angst, there's a lot of change, there's a lot of, feeling unprepared in general. And I think that everyone's balancing different realities, with the common experience of being scared and unsure about the future.
Yeah, I think that both of you mentioned the working parent, especially during this time. A lot of parents are able to work from home, and so they have that ability, and some parents don't have the ability to work from home and are going in. Do you know, Ms. Nazarians, of anything the specific school districts are doing to help address that concern?
Yes, I actually have heard of districts offering through their childcare programs, childcare for students of families with essential workers, or families where parents are working from home and they absolutely cannot support their student online. And so they have programs where students can go to a campus. They're put in pods, if you'll call it, where there's no teacher in the classroom teaching a live lesson, but there is an adult district staff member supervising the student completing their virtual learning, but from the school, and they're receiving the childcare there. Every district has done it differently. I've heard of districts surveying parents. I've heard of districts starting off with just essential employees first, and then kind of going down to who's next on the list that does require this childcare. And so that's one way of supporting working families.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I mean, let's go back to elementary schools because that's where we started off with this. Specifically in elementary schools, I feel like there's such a wide age range of kids in different developmental stages. And what you do for a first grader is definitely not what you're going to do for a sixth grader. It's going to be very different. It's going to look very different. How do you think the school's adapting to different learning that these kids require?
So I know with a lot of districts, they have, just even when you were on a regular school day, pre-COVID days, kinder, first, second, the primary grades, kinder is on its own, and then you've got your primary grades, and they have a different break time, a different lunch time, they have different dismissal. Kinder is always, I shouldn't say always, but most of the time is dismissed prior to all the other grades. Then you've got your first, second, third grade, and then your upper grade. So that applies again through virtual learning, where if you have a student who's in kindergarten, their virtual school day will end slightly earlier than if you have an older child, in terms of what they're expected to do virtually, in terms of turning in an assignment or accessing a website, will also differ from what older students will be expected to do. And that helps, prep them. And, with kinder, especially, like, kinder's starting school for the first time this year. We started school this week in August. And so, trying to get them to understand that, this is not how it was before, that, this is what they know of school. And so getting them, this is your teacher online, and you have to sit up, and you have to make sure that you're paying attention. You have to make sure you're on mute. Yeah. All these things come into play to help them understand that, this is actually real school. Like, it's not FaceTime. It's not, so that can be challenging for parents of younger kids. I know schools also will alter the amount of homework that's given, the expectation of what assignments are given, what gets turned into the teacher. Also, even the tiniest thing of, nightly reading, you'll have less amount of nightly reading recommended for the younger grades versus the older grades.
Right. Thank you for explaining that. It makes a lot of sense, especially the challenges of new kindergartners starting school in the era of COVID. That's thank you for sharing that. That's very interesting. Dr. Edlynn, do you think you can expand about these developmental differences?
So yeah, because I live it with my, so this school year, I have a first grader, third grader, and fifth grader in my home. So I see these differences right in front of my eyes. And I think this is very obvious, but it's worth talking about, that attention span, right? I mean, those younger kids just do not have the same attention. And they need more monitoring and supervision. You can't leave them like you can leave an older elementary school student. They're not going to just independently go through their tasks. So I think that's an important consideration, to be sensitive and compassionate with what the parents are going through, because it matters how old their kids are and what grades they're in, of how much they really need to be actively supervising their children. It's very different when you're trying to also simultaneously work. Also, those younger kids, they just need more physical movement. And I know I talked about that earlier, but they are wiggly, and they are actually learning better if they're moving around, and they're just going to need to do that. So kind of being prepared for that, where a sixth grader can sit and, sit still for longer, most of them. I also, preference is just the technology savvy, and sixth graders are they're better than I am at navigating technology and going from link to link, app to app, whereas a first grader is going to need all the hand holding. I know a lot of first graders have gotten down their video games on their iPads, but it's different than going through their learning apps. But on the flip side, I would say pressure around the sixth graders, like older kids, with their academics and what's going on, versus the first graders, the younger kids, you want them to be learning to learn and enjoying school and understanding how to be in school, which is challenging in distance learning. But these older elementary school, I think there's more anxiety around, are they going to be prepared for middle school, high school? Is what they're doing now, are they actually learning in this structure the way that they need to keep progressing? And I think that's of more concern for parents of those older elementary school kids.
You mentioned something else, and I want to come back to that briefly, is technology.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like technology is really incorporated into this new way of learning. What about families who don't have the technology access or skills? Ms. Nazarians, can you explain what the school districts are able to do or offer?
Yes, I know most, if not all, school districts are offering Chromebooks and computers that are assigned to students. If families need a hotspot because of internet issues, that's also being offered to make sure that every student has access to the technology they need to be able to participate in distance learning. So I know several districts are doing that.
That is very good to know, especially because we've had a podcast in the past talking about the disparities amongst different communities and different districts and different populations, and technology is one of the areas where there is a wide disparity. What about a good home learning environment? I'm sure there's a lot of thought about what is a conducive learning environment and how do you get the best learning done. Has a school come up with an idea for that?
Yeah, it's schools, even at my school, we talked about when we explained to parents, you want them to set up their home classroom, whether it's a desk, you want them to have a space that is theirs. You want that space to be, free of distractions. You want that space to essentially feel like school for them because that's where they will be. So you don't want them Zooming from their bedroom. You don't want them Zooming from the couch. So you want them in a chair at a table, not in front of the TV. And all of this back in March, it was, kids Zoom from wherever, like inside a closet. But now that we've had time to prep, there are certain expectations. I know a lot of teachers will go over Zoom etiquette with children. How do you use Zoom for those who have never used it? Because like I said, some teachers in the spring were not using Zoom. And so even though a student is entering, a school year now through distance learning again, they may not have had any exposure to Zoom and not be familiar with how to use it. And that's where that Zoom etiquette piece comes in. Also with parents, holding parent meetings via Zoom and holding, like our school does, like most schools, we do like a kinder orientation and they get to sneak peek of their classroom. Mm-hmm. Well, that was all done virtually this year. So trying to make sure that every parent is getting every email, they're getting that Zoom link. And then with Zoom and the internet comes, the internet crashing and Zoom, not working properly, and you're trying to share something and then it freezes or you're kicked out of the Zoom meeting and you have to, be allowed back in. So it was really, training the parents on that as well. But having that space where they have all their textbooks that they need, because a lot of schools are sending home materials. Even your basic school supplies are being sent home. And so having all of that in a space, having it organized, having folders so that if the teacher does say, let's grab our math book, they don't leave to go look for it in their bedroom or in the kitchen or where, so you want that space set up to help make that. And then also having like a routine or a schedule, it's school. School starts at, let's say, 8 o'clock. So maybe you're up at 7, you shower, you have breakfast, you're dressed, you're ready to go in front of that computer 5 minutes early in case you have trouble logging on. And I think getting children to, again, understand that, yes, you're home, but when you're in front of the computer during these times, you're at school with your teacher and you're learning. Your focus is the academics.
Dr. Edlynn, what about you? Do you have any ideas about the educational environment and what you've noticed?
She stole all my ideas, but
great, we nailed it.
But I'll elaborate on a couple of things. One is the importance of sleep in all this. And so that ties in both. So one is the routine, where having a really good bedtime, a hard bedtime, so it's easier to wake up early when they need to get going at 8 a.m. or whenever school starts. And also in terms of doing their work, making sure they're not doing their work in bed. If that is happening too much, it can really start to get in the way of good sleep. And that's what we know from the science of sleep and all the research. So really working on having that study space not overlap with relaxation and home space, having it be very designated, like we were saying. Of the routine and structure, I just want to be very compassionate towards parents about how hard and challenging that can be. We all know it's a really good idea and kids really thrive on knowing what to expect every day. And the reality of the home learning is how messy that can get, because the boundaries that are usually there between home and school, or for the grown-ups, home and work, are gone right now. So I think needing to be flexible with your kids a little bit, and collaborating with our kids around good structures and routines and what makes sense, having a visual schedule for younger kids so they can see what's coming up, and how their day is going to look and how long they have to spend on things like that can help just sort of smooth some of those edges.
Absolutely. Do either of you have an idea of how the kids are feeling about this remote learning? What are their thoughts?
It depends a lot on the child, of course, as is true all the time. I will say, as a clinical psychologist working with children, that children who have anxiety have actually been very calm and peaceful, not needing to go to school. And so that is an interesting dynamic that not everyone thinks about, is that actually some kids, because they're not interacting with their world with the same number of demands, they feel better, but it's not real life. And so it's really working on how to help in that more regular day-to-day way that they need to interact with their worlds. I'm seeing across the board an uptick in behavior problems, emotional outbursts around this whole transition. And our schools haven't even started yet for the most part, but even the anticipation is really kind of a spark plug right now. I think if that's happening, if parents are listening to this and wondering if there's something very wrong with their child, that it's actually kind of part of this big transition, and children feeling that grief of this school year too, and not having the day-to-day that they want, the relationships with their teachers, the school events, that they're used to throughout the year. It's just very sad, and it's a big loss that continues, and we don't know when it's going to end, which also adds to the difficulties coping with it.
Yeah, Ms. Nazarians, do you have any other thoughts?
I was just going to piggyback on what Dr. Edlynn said, in terms of, the children missing out on those school activities, so you will, and, again, I bring back with the kindergartners, because this is all they know. But when you have your older students, and, some of them are really grieving, not being able to go in person every day. There's a lot of them want to see their friends. I do know in my district, when they were going back and forth of, do we do a hybrid model possibly, where students come in maybe 2 days a week, and kids were like, I don't mind not being able to necessarily play with my friend, as long as I can at least sit and talk to them from 6 feet away. So that they're yearning for having the social interactions, or, being connected to their teacher. And, you also do get those kids who actually are thriving in distance learning, because, if they felt uncomfortable sharing in front of a class, they can have one-on-one sessions with the teacher during Zoom. Whereas, maybe time in the classroom would not have permitted that, or the space, because even if, you have 20 kids working on a math assignment, you would have a student still not feeling comfortable being pulled aside because, oh, I'm the only one who didn't understand that math lesson. Whereas now in a Zoom session, the teacher can schedule that one-on-one lesson with a parent or with two other, in a really small group, and the audience is taken away. And so a student feels much more comfortable being in that type of small group setting. So you get both from children, but it really is yearning for that social interaction with our peers.
So it sounds like there's been loss and there have been some positive things that have come out from all of this. What kind of educational changes do you think that have been beneficial and that the school districts might consider keeping after the pandemic?
Well, for one, I think Zoom has its positives and has its negatives. For example, I sit in on a lot of IEP meetings, and pre-COVID, we'd have to find a time to meet during the school day or after school. Parent couldn't make it, or they'd want to meet like at 5 o'clock because of work or anything, and we weren't able to accommodate every request. Whereas now with Zoom, a parent can Zoom in from work and participate in the meeting, so they don't have to physically leave. So that's been a plus in terms of teachers, learning all these different platforms that now they're able to. There's one called Screencastify where you're able to record yourself showing parents or showing students how to do something on the computer. So recording lessons, and if you have a student who was absent, well, now they can watch that lesson versus just being assigned, oh, we covered, this science lesson, pages 55 through 57, and we answered these questions. So I think those are a lot of positives in terms of students learning even more technology. That's also been a plus. Students learning to be able to email the teacher when there's an issue. So problem solving, even at a younger age. And I know at my school that I work at, teachers were getting emails because school started this week and families had difficulty logging on. So you have a third grader, fourth grader emailing the teacher saying, Mrs. So-and-so, I tried to log on into the Zoom session. It kept giving me an error. Whereas before that third grader might not, it would have been mom calling or taking care of it. So there have been some positives.
Thank you. Dr. Edlynn, do you have any takeaways that we can share?
I've really thought about what we can take from this experience as parents and families. And I really do see opportunities for building resilience in our children in a way that can serve them their whole lives, going through this. If we can provide them the safe and secure family and home, that is giving them a lot of foundation to be able to manage this strange time in these circumstances. So I think there are opportunities here where we can't fix this for them. We can't take away the pain and the sadness and the grief for them. A lot of times, I think our generation of parenting has done a lot of that, kind of rescuing our kids from failure, from disappointment. This is a time where we're not able to do that. And I think there's opportunities for kids to really, practice, learn coping strategies, self-soothing strategies, emotion regulation strategies. How do I help myself through something really stressful? And that will serve them, the rest of their life as they mature.
That's very interesting. Absolutely. The last thing I really want to touch upon is a lot of parents are very stressed for lots of different reasons. Some feel like, I can't be the teacher. If I could be the teacher, I would have been a teacher, right? This is not what I was designed to do. This is not my strength. I don't have the patience. I don't have the skills. Mm-hmm. I don't have the ability to do this. What kind of message or what can we, say to these parents to help guide them in any way?
Hang in there, hang in there, hang in there, hang in there. I mean, even with my own son, we made the decision that he would go back to school because I was working from home during the shutdown in March, but as of August, I've been back on campus and I'm now back at work full-time every single day. My husband works from home, but has to concentrate. And so having 2 kids under 4 at home would be very, very difficult. And so when my son's school shared that they would be opening up for in-person we made the decision for our family that, okay, this is what's best for our family. And so he's at school. But I can definitely relate to parents, because prior to him going back, I was trying to be that teacher for him. And, a lot of times kids look at their parents as like, you're not my teacher. Or even when school was in session, we would hear a lot of times from parents, I try to explain how to solve that problem. And my son or daughter said, but that's not how the teacher showed me how to do it. And so it's just keep trying, hang in there. And if you need support, the schools will support you. The teachers will support you. Reach out, ask for help, because, we're there. We're in education because of kids, and we want to support and help families. And so if there's anything that a family is struggling with, whether it's getting their child out of bed in the mornings or making sure that they're getting their assignments done, if you're having a hard time with it, reach out to the schools and ask for some support.
Thank you for saying that. That's very good to know that there are resources and help available if parents reach out.
Absolutely. Both for academics and social emotional needs. Because I know some parents, the concerns are not necessarily the academics, but the social emotional piece.
Thank you. Dr. Edlynn, any thoughts?
So I would say to parents, let's just bring it back to basics. Sleep, eat, remember to eat and have, good food in the house, because hangry is bad, right? If you're in a 2-parent household, prioritize that relationship, keep connected and talking. You guys need each other. For single parent households, prioritizing connection with whatever support network is there for you. And to all parents, it's really okay to be greedy right now about getting your own breaks and getting what you need for downtime where you can. And just leave out the guilt, none of it, because that just gets in the way. Health and well-being, and your kids need you to be healthy right now. So my final 5 words: one day at a time.
Absolutely. Right. The idea is, 1, be kind to yourself. 2, reach out to others. This is really a time about community. We need each other to get through this, and that's how we'll succeed.
One piece I actually wanted to add also is, I know of families who've created their own learning pods at home. And so with, if I'm working and so is a neighbor or a family, a friend, they've created pods where, one parent will take the kids in for Monday, Wednesday, the other one will take them in Tuesday, Thursday. And that way the children are, in a sense, getting that social piece. The parents are getting the support that they need, and the kids are getting the academics that they need. So, that's another piece for parents is, going back to the comfort piece of what Dr. Edlynn said, if you have that comfort level with a family and you've expressed that and, they're on board with it, that's another way of getting that support is creating your own little pods at home.
I really can't thank the both of you enough for joining us today and doing this podcast. This was really great information. You both are wonderful people. Thank you for everything you do.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.